There are elements of couples communication that are frankly uncomfortable. Maybe the most important one, and the one that deserves the most attention, is the unintentional role of anxiety. Now, anxiety is a strange thing to say in a conversation about couples communication, at least, at first blush. Many people are uncomfortable talking about anxiety. We see it as personal failure. We see it as some sort of mental illness, but none of that's true. Anxiety is a human reaction to things that make us, anxious, afraid. And intimate relationships are going to have things in them just about invariably that are going to make one or both people in the relationship uncomfortable, anxious, concerned, stressed, afraid. And if we don't address it, if we don't come at it honestly, we're just going to not talk about it. That's the biggest thing about anxiety, is we tend to avoid it. Not because we're chickens or cowards, but because anxiety by its nature makes us veer away from the thing that we're anxious about. I want to say that again. Anxiety makes us veer away from the thing or things that we're anxious about. So you can't talk about couples communication, not effectively, if you're not talking about what makes people anxious to communicate about, as in they don't want to communicate about it, in the relationship. This is the first of a two-part video series in which I'm talking about both the role of anxiety as well as what we're going to do about it. You're going to get part of the solution in this video, part of the solution in the next one, because there's a fair amount to talk about. So let's just start here. If we're anxious about something, like I just said, we tend to avoid it. And in that avoidance, we create all kinds of problems, crazy problems. Small ones in the short term, bigger and bigger ones over time. Let's do an example. A lot of couples, or at least a lot of individuals in relationships, are anxious about talking about money. We could go through the reasons all afternoon. A lot of us don't have a great history with money. We grew up poor and didn't have much exposure to money management. We had parents, bless their hearts, who weren't great money managers for other reasons. They themselves were anxious about money. Maybe we got up into adulthood and things had been pretty straightforward and easy financially, and then we discovered the real world and it can be hard to make a buck, let alone pay for the utility bills. Whatever the reasons, we developed anxiety about money. Then we get in a relationship. And of course, our partner, the person we love, brings their own stuff about money. And while some people are pretty comfortable with it, a lot of people are not. So we get into our relationship, and here we go. We have different views about money. We have different expectations about how to spend money, save money, manage money. Again, I could spend all day talking about some of those differences. Maybe my experience is that if I get money, I spend it because I don't usually have money. So if I have some, I better spend it right now because it's going to go away. Maybe my experience is I have to save every penny till it screams. I put that money in the bank, and we don't touch that money unless the house is on fire, and preferably not then. Maybe money can only be spent on certain things and not other things. This list is almost endless. But the problem is I bring my expectations to this discussion, this conversation, and those expectations, those histories make me anxious. You, my romantic partner, bring your own stuff. You may or may not be anxious. But God help us if at least one of us is anxious, and heaven forbid both of us are anxious. Because the tendency is maybe at the beginning to try to talk about it, but then realize this is a really risky topic. One or both of us get agitated. One or both of us get defensive. One or both of us shut down. One of us shuts down and the other one won't put it down, depending upon how anxiety is driving us individually to respond. Because some of us shut down when we get anxious. Some of us want to fix it this second, and we don't know how to put it down. So most of us, develop a habit of avoiding the topic altogether. Risky to talk about money, can't talk about it with her, with him, and so we just avoid it. Great, except that in the avoidance, we're not addressing the problem. So now we get a bill in the mail, and we're like, oh, this is going to be a fight about money. So we avoid it, or we hope the other person will take care of it. money comes up because of a need and we just kind of shy away from it or say, well, you take care of it, or I can't talk about that right now, or this is just going to lead to a fight about money. And the problem continues to perpetuate. And in fact, we create a gap, almost a hole in our communication about this topic that we both learn to avoid. Well, in the short term, okay, we avoid it and we avoid a nasty fight. But a whole set of other things is happening because the problem is festering. I become resentful when I see you spending money on stuff that I don't think we should be spending money on. Or you get mad because I say we can't spend money on something I'm convinced we have to spend money on. Or we never have any fun anymore because we're always saving our money. Again, the list is endless. And sooner or later, we're going to fight anyway. Here's the great news that everybody knows and doesn't want to talk about. We avoid this conversation, sure, knock yourself out. But sooner or later, we're going to fight about this topic, whether we want to or not. And we're almost certainly going to fight about it at the worst possible time, in front of our parents, in front of the kids, in the car coming home from the movie theater at 2 in the morning, because we've avoided it until the point where we can't avoid it anymore. Probably 90% of the couples I've worked with have had this experience over and over again, and it's not limited to money. Okay, that's nasty. We don't want to go there. But it gets even worse because we fight and we avoid. We fight and we avoid. We fight and we avoid. And it's creating problems in the relationship, even away from money. Like I said earlier, we're building up resentment. We're building up frustration. We're not even always sure what's wrong. Communication begins to break down between us. It often extends to other topics, not just money. That resentment, that anger, that hurt begins to fester, and it really begins to corrode this great relationship that we have. So what are we going to do? Well, there's only one thing to do. We have to address it, because if we don't talk, if we don't address what's going on between us, sooner or later, we're going to damage the relationship. And if we keep up long enough, we're probably going to destroy it. Now, destroying can take a long time. I've seen couples that have gone 20, 30 years and avoided scary topics. And those are the couples that barely speak to each other or sleep in separate rooms or just can't get close to each other anymore because there's so much history of avoidance. So we got to talk about it. And to talk about it means, to some extent, we've got to be able to face what it is we're afraid of. And that's where anxiety comes in. So part of the key to this is understanding what the heck anxiety is. As I said at the beginning of this video, anxiety isn't a mental illness. Anxiety isn't a monster under the bed. Here's a simple definition. Anxiety is an issue that's really a problem that we've learned to treat as a crisis. I'll say that one more time. Anxiety is really a problem, an issue, a concern that for whatever reason or reasons, we've escalated, not intentionally, into a crisis. I'm going to say more about problem and crisis in my next video, but let me summarize it here. If I'm treating something like a problem, it's not going to make me anxious. If I'm treating something like a crisis, oh my God, it's money, this is a disaster, what are we going to do? Then I'm going to escalate that thinking to crisis. And if I'm treating it like a crisis, I'm making myself anxious. And this gets worse before it gets better, because if I escalate this to a crisis in my thinking, I'm going to activate flight or fight, that amazing mechanism in the natural world that makes a mess of things in our relational world, because now we're prepared to run, which is what we usually do, or if we have to, fight. But what we're not doing is talking about it. What we're not doing is addressing the problem. And so anxiety makes us crazy. It makes us agitated, stressed, worried, sad, angry. It has all kinds of impacts. And if we don't do something to face into that little storm, if we don't begin to treat this problem like what it is, a problem instead of a crisis, then we're in real trouble. And if we keep that up, eventually we're going to drive ourselves crazy in the relationship. So what do we got to do? Well, I'm going to say more about that in the next video. But the bottom line today is we've had to start with recognizing that we're anxious in the first place. And to the degree that we can, beginning to figure out what we're anxious about, which is not rocket science. It's scary. Sometimes it's terrifying, but it's only just that. It's only just scaring. Sure, Eric, easy for you to say. As a guy who fought chronic anxiety for 20 years, I can tell you at the end of the day, more than any other single thing, the work that was in front of me was to first identify what I was scared of. and to realize that whatever it was, at the end of the day, it was a problem. Maybe a complex problem, maybe a serious problem, maybe a problem that scared the crap out of me, but still a problem. And I could address it and deal with it, and there were going to be answers to it. That can be very hard to see at the beginning of this work. But if we're going to address the monster in the room, the elephant in the room, we're going to have to identify what we're scared of. Is it money? Is it talking about sex? Is it the in-laws? Is it where we're going to live? Is it me not having a job or you not having a job? Is it something to do with the kids? Is it a host of other issues? Well, what has to happen is we've got to address it, be able to talk to each other about it. And even the beginning effort to address it begins to help us reorient out of crisis mode and into problem mode where we can actually do something about it. Well, more about this in part 2. Thank you.